I'm excited about this one. He wrote and performed one of the most eartastic, hook-laden classics of the entire 80s. A song that is a true sonic time machine. I mean, over its 4 minutes, it transports you back to the greatest year in music history, in my opinion. Seriously. Sadly, its singer would only live for another few years after it was a hit, dying at only 43 from a brain tumor. Today's story, very interesting. He wrote this song as a demo for one of the biggest acts of the time, only they weren't able to record it. So he pretty much recorded it the way that he thought that they would have done it. It turned out brilliant. We have interviews with one member of this group he recorded it for, as well as another of his famous collaborators. The story's coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember the state-of-the-art gaming system known as Atari, you're going to dig this channel. Music nostalgia for everybody. Make sure you subscribe below right now to get the best of music history through interviews and video. Also, if you want to support our channel, our mission to keeping the music alive through interview and video, click on the Patreon link below. So it's time for another edition of Number One in Our Hearts. This is a show that honors songs that were so unbelievably amazing. They should have been number one on the Billboard Hot 100, seriously. But due to various things, usually outside of the band or artist's control, the song came up a little bit short. Today, we're taking a deep dive into one of my personal favorite songs from 1984 that, as much as any song from the 80s, can take me right back to that magical year. It's a song that many thought or still think was Hall and Oates. But it was a really talented guy who didn't get his due. I'm going to break down I Can Dream About You by Dan Hartman. Dan Hartman's career has been eclectic, to say the least, spanning over 2 decades. This jack of all trades has been a singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, producer, and he's collaborated with a long list of artists. His credentials include work in rock and pop and dance and jazz and R&B and ambient genres. All over the place. Things really started taking off for Dan Hartman when he joined the Edgar Winter group in 1972. It's where he played bass, he wrote or co-wrote many of their songs, and he sang on 3 of their albums. They Only Come Out at Night, that was in 72, Shock Treatment in 74, and the Edgar Winter group with Rick Derringer came out in 75. In fact, Hartman co-wrote and sang the classic rock ditty Free Ride. Hartman also co-produced and engineered Winter's solo album, Jasmine Night Dreams. In 1976, Dan Hartman launched his solo career with the release of the promo record, Who is Dan Hartman, and Why is Everyone Saying Wonderful Things About Him? I gotta say, one of the best album titles ever, maybe. This compilation disc, though, it included existing material from Johnny Winter and the Edgar Winter group. At the dawn of the 80s, Hartman began moving away from the disco scene, and in 1981 he released It Hurts to Be in Love. Although the album contained several really catchy tracks, the singles didn't chart well in the Hot 100. The eponymous single, It Hurts to Be in Love, that one topped out at number 72. But for all his mixed songwriting success coming into the 80s, Dan Hartman had another trick up his sleeve. A great producer. Starting in the late 70s, Hartman honed his skills on multiple projects, including Foghat's Night Shift, 238 special albums, and the Average White Band Cupids in Fashion. 1982 is when that one came out. Now, Dan Hartman also wrote It's Never Too Late for Diana Ross on her 1981 album Why Do Fools Fall in Love. But 1984 would be the year that Dan Hartman made his biggest mark in music history with his undeniable hit, I Can Dream About You. If I can't hold you tonight. You might be surprised to learn that it actually almost never happened. Seems like it happens a lot with the great ones. Hartman, who had a home recording studio, He was always at work on various projects, and a fair share of those ended up in the hands of other artists, especially in the 80s. So when he made the demo for I Can Dream About You, he actually didn't write it for himself. Rather, he wanted to pass it along to Hall and Oates, who were killing it at the time. And decades later, Daryl Hall would tell the story of what happened. He said, and I quote, "An old friend of ours, Dan Hartman, wrote this song. I remember back in the day, he came up to me and said, 'Hey, I have this great song I wrote for you guys. It's you. You have to sing the song.' And unfortunately, we had just finished an album and we couldn't put it on the album because it was done. So I said, 'Sorry, Dan.' And about 6 months later, I was watching MTV and there it was." End of quote. I also had the chance to interview John Oates, and I asked him about this because I'm such a fan of this song. Here's what he said. As we get his reaction, I do want to thank our sponsor, First Zenny Eyewear, the glasses that I always wear. Zenny rocks, I gotta tell you. So cost effective, you'll scarcely believe that quality frames can be obtained for this price. Check out their latest styles at zenny.com.
You know, it was a great song. I knew it was great, and I knew it sounded just like us. I can't remember the circumstances why we didn't record it. I think we had finished the record. I think
you'd finished Big Bam Boom is what I remember.
Yeah, and we just didn't want to add another song. There was no place for it, and it's a shame too because it would have been a really cool song for us. But he didn't do too badly with it himself. So.
He kind of mimicked you guys on that song, really. Yeah. A lot of people to this day think that's Hall and Oates.
That's right. That's okay. I like that too.
Hall and Oates would actually cover I Can Dream About You themselves on their 2004 album, Our Kind of Soul. I can dream about you. So Hall and Oates effectively out of the picture, Hartman had to make other plans for his demo. Now, fortunately, friend and famed producer Jimmy Iovine, he hit him up at just the right time. He told Dan that he needed a blue-eyed soul song for a new movie that he was working on, the 1984 cult classic Streets of Fire.
Amy Madigan in a Walter Hill film, Streets of Fire.
And what a stroke of luck. Hartman had just the song for this movie. He told Iovine, he had a demo that he thought would work. Streets of Fire, for those who haven't seen or heard of it, it's a neo-noir rock fantasy that takes place in an alternate universe of sorts, or as the movie puts it, another time, another place. What it is really is a city stylized as a retro mix of the 50s and the 80s with elements of both. Kind of a perfect fit for the song, actually. Gosh, I wish I lived there. The film opens with the singer Ellen Aim performing in concert before a crowd of her fans. During the show, a gang of bikers from another part of town called the Bombers, I believe, they crash the party and they kidnap Aim. The movie then follows the exploits of Ellen's ex-boyfriend Tom Cody as he fights his way through dangerous cityscapes to rescue her.
I think you're forgetting something. I got the gun.
I can get guns.
Now, although Streets of Fire boasts some striking visuals and has a really catchy soundtrack, it did bomb at the box office. However, since then, it has garnered a pretty faithful following. It's amassed an audience score of about 71% on Rotten Tomatoes. And, it's, like I said, a cult classic. It's a quintessentially 80s cheeser. I really love it. But in the end, the most successful part of this enterprise was its soundtrack. And aside from I Can Dream About You, there are some other songs, worth noting. Starting with the Fix's Deeper and Deeper, great song. When I get deeper. There are a couple of tracks written by Jim Steinman and performed by Fire Inc., Nowhere Fast, and Tonight is What It Means to Be Young. That's what it was. Rounding out the big names, Stevie Nicks and also Tom Petty both contributed as songwriters, resulting in the tracks Sorcerer and Never Be You. Rumor is they named the movie after Bruce Springsteen's track from Darkness on the Edge of Town, Streets of Fire, but they couldn't get the rights to it. As for I Can Dream About You, in the movie, it was sung by the fictional group The Sorrels, who performed the song as the movie comes to a close. Actually, the vocals in the film actually were Winston Ford. But for the soundtrack, it was all Dan Hartman. Actually, Dan insisted that he sing the song on the soundtrack and that his version be the single. Also, he did stipulate that his voice had to be featured on any video for the song. Although this would create some confusion, kind of like Eddie and the Cruisers like we were talking about a few weeks ago, it worked out for Hartman, making him a near overnight sensation. In fact, several sources have said that Dan admitted to approaching it the way he thought that Daryl, Hall, and John Oates would. You know, how they would record the song or sing it, which makes sense since he sent them the demo. Anyway, so in essence, he mimicked their style, and the song was a smash that many still believe is Hall and Oates. I had a friend just the other day say, how about this Hall and Oates? I don't see under my feet. I Can Dream About You was definitely the most successful part of Streets of Fire, of the soundtrack, and Dan Hartman's solo career for that matter. The single peaked at number 6 on the Hot 100 and Cashbox chart. It went to number 7 on the AC chart and number 8 on the Hot Dance Club chart. Internationally, it reached number 18 in the Netherlands. It went to number 16 in Belgium, number 13 in Sweden, 12 in UK, 11 in Canada, 7 in South Africa, went to number 4 in Ireland, and then number 3 in Australia. Now, Hartman's frequent songwriting partner, Charlie Midnight, he really summed the song up pretty perfectly when he described it as a perfect and timeless pop song with an infectious opening bass line that hooks you every time you hear it. He's absolutely right. It's got so many eartastic hooks as the bass line complements the percussion right off the bat, extending into that piano figure that effortlessly extends to Dan Hartman's hypnotic tenor vocal. No more timing. I mean, before you know it, you're into Hartman's brilliant chorus, and he pretty much out-hauls Hall and Oates here. It's simply full-throttle 80s magic. I Can Dream About You is also a key part of Hartman's 1984 solo record of the same name. Primarily a pop rock album, this fifth studio offering also included R&B and new wave elements in it. 2 singles besides the title track were issued, We Are the Young, and then there was also Second Nature. We Are the Young, that went to number 25, and Second Nature went to number 39. Most of those songs were written together by Hartman and the aforementioned Charlie Midnight. Charlie said that working with Dan Hartman on the album was just a great privilege, great learning experience for him, but it was also a crash course in collaboration. Charlie said that Hartman involved him in all phases of the production, and because of that experience, he was able to make the transition into record production. What he would go on to say is, in essence, I went to school during the making of the I Can Dream About You album. Aside from Streets of Fire, I Can Dream About You has appeared on a few other movies and TV shows over the years. It should be in a lot more. There was Penguins of Madagascar in 2014, Hand of God in 2015, Narcos Mexico in 2018, and Euphoria in 2022. And introducing it to the younger generation, I Can Dream About You has also made an appearance on Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories in 2006. As we've already seen, Dan Hartman was definitely a prolific collaborator, and that trend would continue straight through the 80s into the 90s. Started with his production work with Neil Sedaka's 1984 album Come See About Me. In 87, he also co-produced Joe Cocker's Unchain My Heart with Charlie Midnight. And in 1989, he also produced most of the songs on Tina Turner's 1989 album Foreign Affair. You're simply the best. He would also continue where he left off with Streets of Fire. He made a long list of contributions on film soundtracks. We all know that Kenny Loggins is the king of the movie soundtrack. To say that Dan Hartman has at least earned a spot on the royal court. Check this out. Besides Streets of Fire, you can also find Hartman's work on Fletch, Down and Out in Beverly Hills, Perfect, Breakin', Crush Groove, classics, Scrooged, Oliver and Company, and then as you move into the 90s, the first two Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies. And during that run, his songs would be sung by big names, Chaka Khan, Billy Joel. Why should I worry? Why should I care? And then there's Little Richard. But even bigger than all of these was his contribution to the Rocky IV soundtrack in 1985, right? Living in America, sung by the great James Brown. Living in America was released as a single in 85, and it reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. The song entered the top 40 on January 11, 1986, and it remained on the chart for 11 weeks. It also peaked at number 5 on the UK singles chart. Actually, Hartman and Charlie Midnight were nominated for a Grammy Award for Best R&B Song, and Brown won a Grammy Award for Best Male R&B Vocal Performance for that song. Another notable collaboration happened in 86 when Hartman provided backing vocals for Steve Winwood's The Finer Things, one of the best songs of the 80s in my opinion. The Finer Things went to number 8 on the Hot 100 the following year. Now, I'm actually leaving a lot of projects out here, but I think you get the idea. Dan Hartman was a maniac. He was amazing. He kept pretty busy throughout the 80s. Now, as the decade came to a close, Hartman decided it was time to release another solo album, but this time he had something different in mind. New Green, Clear Blue was an ambient collection of plush instrumentals that Dan said were meant to help people to connect with their subconscious. He called it a platform for the imagination. Now, the album received very good reviews, but sitting squarely outside of the mainstream, it was not a commercial success. But sadly, on March 22nd, 1994, Dan Hartman passed away from a brain tumor, and he was only 43 at the time of his death. Hartman was recording another solo album at the time, intending to return again to the realm of contemporary pop and dance music. Fortunately, the album was never finished. However, in December 1994, Columbia released a Dan Hartman compilation album called Keep the Fire Burnin'. 2 singles were released from that, The Love in Your Eyes. There was also the title track, and both were new songs that would have been on the latest solo album. Dan's was a death that was pretty much passed over by the media. But he definitely deserved celebration for gifting the world so many great songs, so many great productions. I definitely have to thank him, especially for I Can Dream About You. For me, it's just potent nostalgia. It's a time machine that for a little over 4 glorious minutes can instantly transport me back to my childhood. Summer of 1984. The summer of the 80s, as far as I'm concerned. It was the summer that the A-Team ruled my television set. It was the summer that I saw Ghostbusters about 8 times in the movie theater.
What happened? Are you okay?
He slimed me.
That's great. Actual physics.
It was the summer where my friends and I had karate tournaments on the trampoline inspired by seeing The Karate Kid. And it was the summer where Bruce Springsteen, Prince, Michael Jackson, Duran Duran, Tina Turner, Wham, Van Halen, and I Can Dream About You by Dan Hartman was the soundtrack to a life worth having lived.
There's one thing to do. I can dream about
You know, in 1993, Hartman commented, "So many things have changed in terms of social and political issues, as well as the need for love and personal relationships. All of these things are the reasons why writing and recording new material is most meaningful to me." End of quote. I had the opportunity to visit with Dan Hartman's former bandmate, Edgar Winter. As someone who knew Dan so very well, I'm going to leave him with the last word.
From the pain in my heart, 'cause it's you that I need.
I decided that I would just put out the word. So we just started listening to tape after tape, thousands of tapes that came into the office. And Dan Hartman was the first discovery. And he was the first person. And I heard his demo tape and I said, "This guy is incredible. I want to play with him. I know we can work together, sing together, write together, and have a band together." And couldn't have been more right about all of that. And Dan not only loved rock and blues, but he loved pop music. He loved stuff like the Carpenters. And he had a really almost Paul McCartney sense of
He did.
melody.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Like if you listen like Free Rod, there's a certain youthful innocence about it.
Oh yeah.
And he just did that naturally.
Well, come on now and get yourself a free ride. You know how to hold it just right.
Leave us a comment about Dan Hartman and I Can Dream About You. What do you remember about this magnificent song? What are your memories of the summer of 1984 and all the things I mentioned? Let us know in the comments below. If you dig our content, make sure to subscribe so that you never miss out on our videos. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, records and the truth, my friends.